Our guest speaker today is Angie McKinnon-Carter. She's a lecturer at Utah Valley University. Welcome, Angie.
Hi, Kevin. So I just want to thank Kevin and QSR International and NVivo for the opportunity to present. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I'm looking forward to showing you how NVivo is helping me and my research team code and analyze data to understand more about teacher-student writing conferences. And those writing conferences are times when a teacher and a student meet together to talk about the student's paper in progress. So this quote from Laurel Johnson Black was the beginning of my team's journey to understand writing conferences. I teach writing at an open enrollment university in the Intermountain West, and in an effort to improve my teaching practice, I decided to examine writing conferences, which I use frequently when teaching writing. And I asked one of my colleagues, Chris Lee, to help me. Over the years, we had 6 student interns work with us on the project. Initially, we wanted to examine if students have writing conferences with their teachers, if that leads students to produce higher quality final papers. So this quote, conferencing is something we do, but unexamined, it remains something we do not understand and thus cannot improve, is really something, a mantra that plays in my mind all the time about how important it is to examine our practice. So we came to NVivo after the study was designed. I heard about it, and I went to a training workshop. And at that time, I felt that it would help us keep track of our data and explore it more efficiently than what we could do with pen and paper alone. So our process really has been a hybrid one. We do a lot of initial coding with pen and paper as a team. When we've reached consensus, we transfer that coding into NVivo and run descriptive statistics and look for patterns there. And NVivo then offers us a way to test some of our assumptions in a more time-effective manner. So one of our assumptions was, does more change lead to a better quality paper? And coding the results sometimes surprised us. We thought that more change would indicate better quality, but drilling into the data helped us really make sense about why this is not necessarily the case. So in the project I'm going to share with you today, my research team and I focused on knowledge types. Specifically, we focused on instances of declarative knowledge, or what to do, which we named as what for our coding scheme, and procedural knowledge, or how to make changes, which we named as how in our coding scheme. As shown here, the difference in being able to name something and be able to do something can be dramatic. For instance, I can name a jump rope, and I can even name double dutch and describe how it's done, but doing double dutch has remained elusive for me. Students can have similar experiences when writing papers. From our review of our data, our research team sensed a difference between the problems that teachers and students could identify in a paper and the students' ability to make changes later. NVivo helped us start figuring out the significance of that difference. So the following research questions guided this study's exploration. Which speaker uses which knowledge types most in the writing conferences? Does the amount of discussion of a certain knowledge type connect to the amount or types of changes the writer makes? How does the draft illustrate how well the writer knew how to make changes? Do the writers understand how to make changes? And to what extent do the changes improve the quality of the paper? So we collected data throughout a semester. For 2 papers, we collected rough drafts and final drafts, recorded conferences, and administered surveys before, immediately following the conference, and after the paper had been graded. We collected data in a way that would triangulate information and provide ways to understand data from different angles. Because we collected several pieces of data for each person, we put this data into cases in NVivo. And I'm going to quickly switch over to NVivo and show you where that's located. So when I go into my nodes, there's actually case nodes here. And you can see that all of the students in our study are listed here. And what you can see is, like, for instance, Tina, we have 9 sources coded for her. She's one of our initial people that we looked at. And Michael is another one. So there's some others that maybe just have some survey data in there. And this allows us to keep building that information as we gather more sources and then be able to tabulate and compare across cases. So we had to develop some tools to help us analyze the data. So first of all, we had to develop some surveys. We used our student interns to develop the surveys to test language and concepts so that they would be understandable to the freshmen and sophomores that we were trying to work with. The surveys are designed to have multiple questions that ask about different aspects of an issue. For instance, one question asks students what the ideal ratio of teacher and student talk is in a conference, and another question asks whether the teacher talked more than the student. And of course, we can go in to our data and figure this out, but asking that question was more about getting a perception about whether the student or the teacher felt, or the student felt like the teacher talked more. So I'm going to explain now how we prepared each type of data for NVivo and how NVivo helped us code the information in each data type. So first of all, we had the transcripts, and these are the written version of the audio of the writing conferences. So the writing conferences were recorded via audio only, and then we transcribed these manually. And we did a full transcription, noting pauses, we put timestamps in there, and did intonation units. And intonation units is a bit complicated, and I'm just going to briefly, it's somewhat analogous to a clause in writing. Not exactly, but somewhat similar to that. They're also called idea units. So once we got the transcripts set up with this information, we imported them as a Word file into NVivo. And from here, we were able to code them both for segmenting and then for the thematic things that we're looking at, specifically the knowledge types. So I'm going to swing over to NVivo now and show you some of that. So the codes will be, NVivo calls codes nodes, and so our codes are going to be here. And I am going to pull this down a little bit so that you can see more of what we have. So you can see here, here's our thematic codes for knowledge type. We have how and what, and we also created an other category when students weren't actually talking about the paper, we're talking about something else. This allowed us to so code the conference for that without forcing something into a how or a what. Segmenting was important because this allowed us to count. So specific for this project, intonation units are important, and then we also coded for the instructor turn and the student's turn. This then allowed us to do some queries. So I am going to show you just quickly one of the queries that we did in NVivo for the transcripts. So I'm going to pull up one that I've already done. You can see here, this is Michael's, and I have it coded by how and what, and this is by speaker turn. So eventually I want to have intonation units in here, but trying to get 3 codes working together hasn't worked out so well to put it into a matrix like this. So this is an initial beginning just at the number of turns that the teacher and the student make with each type. And because I know a lot of you are going to want to do something like this, I want to show you how I actually put this matrix code together and then how I saved it into my project so that I didn't have to do it every single time. So to do that, I go up to the Query tab and I click on Matrix Coding. And from here, I would normally add this to my project, but I already have this one added to my project, so I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to add rows and columns. So I'm going to duplicate what I have here. So for rows, I'm going to select the items that I want. So I go to Select, and now I'm going to go to Nodes, and I want my knowledge types for my rows. And because I'm going to want each of these knowledge types to be a separate row, I'm going to click on them separately rather than clicking on knowledge type. Then I hit OK, and then I need to make sure to add this to the list. So then I'm going to go to columns, and for columns, I want to know how many times the speaker and the student are doing that. So I'm going to add speaker and student turn. And I'm also curious about how many times, in terms of intonation units, the different knowledge types are showing out. This won't show me specifically for teacher instructor those intonation units, but it will give me an idea overall about how many intonation units are going for each knowledge type. So I hit OK here, and again I add this to my list, and now I need to select the source that I want to use. So I'm going to select a specific transcript, and I haven't done Gwen's yet for this, so I'm going to put Gwen's transcript in here. Actually, I'm not sure about that. Let's just do Michael's. Okay, so Michael's is in there, okay, and now I have everything that I need here, and now I'm going to just double check my code matrix. So I want to look for both the knowledge type and the instructor turn or the student turn or intonation unit, and I want this to show up in multiple rows, multiple columns like this. And now when I run it, you can see that this part of my chart is the same, but now I also have intonation units. And I know that these intonation units are similar, or not similar, but they encompass what is here. Now this isn't going to add across because it's a different segmenting, but I can look and I can see, okay, the what and the how are close. There's a little bit more what than how, but it's almost 50-50. Okay, maybe 55-45, but that's pretty close. Now I can look at Tina's, which I've already done, and I can see that her whats are a little bit higher, not as many other going on, and a little bit less of the how. It's still pretty close to Michael's, so then I can start to drill in and start to figure out what's happening with that. So this is the beginning. This is how queries can get us a start and how to look at that. So I just want to quick show you how you would drill into this. So I have my node matrix, and then when I double click inside of a box, it'll actually pull up all the intonation units for that person. And I can start to analyze what's happening in those. Like some of these, you know, are just a marker letting the person know that they're just kind of following along. So that may not be as relevant to some of the other things like despite all these reasons. So hopefully that's starting to make sense. So that's how we did the transcripts. So the next piece was to get the drafts ready. And what we were looking at here, one of our questions was looking at the amount of changes that students made. And to do this, we needed to compare their rough draft and their final draft together. So how we did this is we did some pre-NVivo preparation first. First of all, in Word, there's a way to compare the drafts to each other. So you pull up the rough draft file and the new draft file, you compare those, and when you do that, Word color codes them, as you can see here. I've just put in a few examples to illustrate. So I can see that these are deletions, I can see that this is a deletion but then it's been moved somewhere, and I can see additions here. And this is going to then help me when I go to code, because I have this color coding as a way to help me recognize what I'm seeing. So once we compared the drafts, then we saved the comparison as a PDF because saving it as a Word didn't transfer over, and then we imported this into NVivo. So now I want to show you how coding stripes help with this. So again, I'm going to go back into NVivo, and now I'm going to look at one of my sources. So we've been doing a lot with Tina, so I'm going to look at her comparison here. that you can see it a little bit better, I'm going to do this. Now, to view the coding stripes, I'm going to go over to coding stripes, and I actually want to see all of my nodes that are coded. And I'm going to drag this over so it's closer here. So first of all, you can see I've put all of this into Tina's case, so that node is coded. And then I have these codes specifically for the draft. So let me go over into nodes and show you those. So here, my draft change, no change would be anything that's in black. And my changes, I code at 2 levels. I code at the content, so is it a citation? Is it something with formatting, like changing the margins or something like that? Phrases, punctuation, theme, and word. So I can analyze the level of the change in terms of how much change is in there. And then I can also code for the type of change. So is it an addition, a deletion? Is she moving things around? Is she changing one word for another, or a phrase or a sentence for another? So then when I go back here, I can highlight, and I'm going to highlight for some selected items. So I thought it'd be interesting to just show you the coding for additions, so you can just see that. So what's happening here is that I can see all of my nodes that are coded on my coding stripes, but here I can see exactly which ones are additions. And as I scroll through this, I can see that she's cut this out, but that she added this, and I wouldn't call this a substitution because it's different in theme than this other one. So as I kept looking, one of the things that we were interested in looking at was at thesis statements. So her thesis statement appears right, originally it was right in here. And you can see that all of this has been crossed out and moved. So I can see what was there originally, and now I can scroll to the new information. Now as I look at this, I'm a little bit surprised at my codes because I can see that this language, while the causes may be wide and varied, actually did appear here, okay? So because of that, I want to change this code. So I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to right-click, and I am going to uncode this, okay? It's going to bring this up, and I'm going to uncode it at addition because this is actually a move. So now that I've done that, I can recode it, and it is going to pull up my nodes, and I want my draft changes here, change, and I want the type of change to be a substitution. And so now I have this change to be a substitution. And notice now that I've done that, the coding is not highlighted anymore, so I know that I have been successful in doing that. So even though the original coding made this look like it was an addition from Word, by looking at the original, I can make those changes. And so still a person that makes changes based on what I'm seeing in the data. Okay. So now I can do a query to show what has been changed. And again, I've already pulled this one up, I think. Here we go. So here, this is the 4 students that we started with. And I can see that Tina is making more changes than anyone, and Brian is making fewer changes. And so then I can, with this information, I can go and I can look at, okay, well, how did their ratings show up for that, which we have as an attribute. And with that, I can then see, interestingly, Tina's did not improve in quality despite the number of changes. And Michael's, while somewhat lower in quantity, his did improve in terms of quality. And this allows me then to drill in and see what's going on with this unexpected result. And this was a very big surprise for us. So one of the things I can do is I can look specifically at Tina's and see what's happening. So I have this expanded change for Tina. And now I can look in and say, okay, well, what is she adding? And I specifically want to see what she's adding that's more than just a single sentence. So I double click in here, and it pulls up what I've coded in her draft. And I can see that a lot of what she's doing is adding in information from sources. That's interesting, because it means that maybe she's not doing enough of talking about her own ideas there. To be able to get that back, I need to go back into my queries, and I'm going to double click on this one again. And I want to look at Michael's. So I can see he's got those as well, but look, here's one that is all his own ideas. And that seems to be a little bit more than what she was doing. So again, NVivo allows me very quickly to drill in to my data, which is really important for what we're doing. Okay, the last piece of the puzzle for us was importing surveys, and this was actually the most difficult piece for us. So we would have had to organize our surveys differently to be able to actually import from Qualtrics into NVivo. So I'm going to illustrate some of those concerns as I show you what would happen if I tried to import our surveys into NVivo directly from Qualtrics. So first of all, let me show you where you would find the data import in NVivo for surveys. And that is over here under Data, and then there's this Survey button, and you click on that, and you can either click on Qualtrics, and it'll take you to that page, or you can do a Microsoft Excel file. And I'm going to show you right now what I tried to import from Qualtrics. So I have that data, and I'm going to show you how that looked. Okay, so when you click on the Survey button here, and you click on Qualtrics, it brings up this Welcome to the Import. Then you click Next, and it asks you to choose. And I'm going to do this immediate post-conference survey for the research argument paper. So when I click Next, then I want to make sure that I put this in cases, and I also want to make sure that I have the respondent ID that I want. Once I do that, it brings up all of my respondents and allows me to either import or not import that information. And this is where I realized that I had a problem. So you can see I don't want to import the instructions, so I put do not import here. But then here's a problem. How long did the conference last is really intended to be one question. And the way NVivo is trying to import it is as 5 different questions. And I realized that the reason this is because this would be pretty easy for it to come across as a single response. But once I hit specify, it created an open-ended aspect, and then it wanted to create a different option for each of those. So a better choice would have been to have more than 20 minutes as an option, and then to have another question that could be open-ended where they would have specified. Because I didn't do that, the surveys would not import from Qualtrics. So here's my recommendations. So to clean up the data, I had to import the survey as an Excel document. So when downloading, I selected export as choice text instead of numeric values. This then gave me 1 to 5 instead of a 1, 6 to 10 instead of a 2, and so on. And then I needed to clean up the data, combine columns, and rename the columns. And I'm going to show you this as well. So I have the original Excel file. And you can see here it's doing some of the same things as the Qualtrics import wanted to do. And I realized this is not going to work. So instead, what I've done is I've combined that and I've provided shorter names. Instead of the actual question, I have a label for that question, if you will. So now I have 16 to 20 minutes for Clark, but 11 to 15 minutes for Anna, for instance. And this shows up in one column instead of across multiple columns. So now that I have that, I can import this into Qualtrics. So let me, once again, show you how to do this. So because I think a lot of you are going to want to import surveys in, let me show you how to do this. So now I'm going to do this from a Microsoft Excel file. All right. Okay. And I want to put in these short questions. So this is my abbreviation for changing the questions from the long question to a descriptive title. Now that I've opened it, you can see that the survey wizard is fairly similar. So I only have one row for my question header. I don't actually have dates, but if I did, I would mark this. And then I want this to be in cases, okay? And I'm going to go by name instead of ID number. And I'm going to add to existing classification of persons because I already have these people in NVivo. So I'm going to hit next. And then it tells me that closed-ended questions are used to attributes and open-ended are used to create nodes. So my ID number, study period, name, these are things that I would like to be attributes. But some of these conference prep, even though it comes across as a kind of a closed-ended question, I would like these to come out as open-ended. So I'm going to make these changes here. But then when I get here, these come across as agree, disagree, strongly disagree, and I do want these to come across as closed-ended. So anything that's explained, I would want that to be open-ended because they're explaining this. So I'm going to change that. And that's an explain. And this is going to work for all of my participants. Okay? So now that I'm finished, it's going to import all that information and create those nodes. Okay? And if I go into my sources, I can see that that information has now been added. Whoops. Right here. Okay? And it's opened up so I can start to compare those. Okay? So I can see things like I will make revisions because that's what the instructor wants, and I can look at this here. Now, because it's a little bit hard to look back and forth between the student's name over here and these columns, I just pulled this out into a survey or into a slide for you. So I'm looking at these two. I will make revisions because I want to produce more quality paper, and I actually understand what revisions to make. As I look at the 4 participants that we started with, I can see that most of my participants want to produce a more quality paper, but Brian is neutral about this, and this seems interesting, especially when I look and say, when he says, I understand what revisions to make, seems to be a disconnect in how he interacts with his paper. Where Tina wants to do a better paper, but she's not really sure how to go about doing it. That was an important finding for us. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about some things that you can do when you've got multiple matrices going on like I have here. I've showed you how to double click and drill down, and I've showed you column and row settings, but now I want to show you this undock feature. So for instance, I have Tina's intonation units here. And okay, so I have this draft change comparison. Let's say I want to look at that in comparison to something else. By undocking it, I can pull that out and I can put it next to something else. So, for instance, okay, I can look and see if there's any relationship between hows and whats and the kinds of changes. Nothing immediately comes to mind here, but by undocking it, I'm not switching back and forth between the two. And I'm looking into, I can drill into this one or I can drill into this one and start to examine those in more detail. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. Here's some references for some work that I've done. And I'm completely open to any questions that you might have. Does anyone have any questions?
We do have a